LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the May 29th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the 9 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the big 5 corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, their Sunday morning news analysis shows on the so-called corporate media here in the United States. Although there was no ABC this week with George Stephanopoulos this week, it was preempted by auto racing in Monaco, not even the Indianapolis 500, I don't think. But anyway, I always criticize the news programs when they preempt their flagship news programs for sporting events. That doesn't seem right to me, but maybe I just have different priorities than so much of the American people, I guess. You can let me know what you think in the comment section, but I will be giving you my informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today on the topic, who won the debt ceiling fight? There's been an agreement in principle, at least during the Sunday shows, there was an agreement in principle. Now there's actually the text of a bill. I put the full text of the bill down in the video description under sources, so you can read. It's like 95, 100 pages. I'm actually going to show you one specific provision of the bill at the end. Section 324 that would argue that the winner of this debt ceiling deal was none other than West Virginia supposed Democratic Senator Joe Manchin. And I'll talk about that at the end of the program if you can make it for, I think it's only going to be about 45 minutes or so, since we're down one news program and most of my clips are kind of short. There are a couple longer ones, but anyway, for political comedy, I'm actually going to go to Meet the Press, which did this thing. Last week I criticized Meet the Press for having a Sunday show that looked like it could have been recorded sometime days in advance. It was like the only news program that didn't cover Biden's news conference from Hiroshima, Japan, and the decision to give F-16s to Ukraine, and that's because it looked like it had been recorded before that ever happened. Well, you'll see when I get to the NBC News Meet the Press news summary that they didn't even know there'd been a debt ceiling deal. They instead decided to cover this topic, the crisis and confidence in the U.S. Supreme Court, and they had a lot of good guests on, and it's not like it was a bad topic, but it wasn't really breaking news or didn't have any coverage of the breaking news, which it's almost like they're trying to trick us to make us think that they're broadcasting on Sunday when they're not. That's especially if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press. And anyway, that's their slogan. And sometimes they don't even broadcast on Sunday. At least they're better than ABC, which was preempted for auto racing. But for my political comedy, one of my favorite commenters is a Slate legal analyst for Slate Magazine, Dahlia Lithwick, who's actually went to the same college I did around the same time, and though I didn't know her back in college, and it does a great job reporting on legal matters and is talking about the Supreme Court here. And she kind of makes a joke in the middle here, but the real joke is kind of at the end that nobody laughs at. They laugh at her like joke in the middle. But when she really puts it specifically at the end, the real joke about the U.S. Supreme Court, like what is a centrist on the Supreme Court, is kind of a joke. And that's my political comedy clip for today, not on the main topic. On the NBC News Meet the Press topic, I'll talk about a little more as we watch the first 3 clips together that are all from Meet the Press together over here.
Dahlia, I was actually talking off camera with Jennifer Mascott, and she just sort of implied, she thought that it is now clear Justice Alito doesn't necessarily follow Justice Roberts' lead anymore, and that in the first few years he did. That Clarence Thomas is almost the conservative leader these days. Is that your read?
I think there is a block on the court that is Justice Alito and Thomas, and sometimes Justice Gorsuch, that are very much doing their own thing that is very separate from what the more centrist block of Roberts and Kavanaugh and sometimes Barrett are doing. I think that to the extent you can call it a centrist bloc.
I was just going to say, there will be some people listening going, that's a centrist bloc?
Right, and it's important
but in
to
this,
say.
of the 3-3 and 3, it kind of is.
And it's important to say, you know, to Joan's point, Justice Kavanaugh is now the median justice on the court. There's nothing that will tell you where this court is more than that statistic. But I think it's interesting that at least sometimes you have the sense that on that center, there are votes in play. I don't think there are votes in play in Justice Alito and Justice Thomas's world.
So let's talk about this.
So that was an important analysis of the way the Supreme Court is ideologically from right to left. And you may remember a few weeks back, I predicted how the Supreme Court was going to rule on the Mifepristone case, basically based on that 7-2 with Alito and Thomas as like the totally intransigent ultra-conservatives on the court. Maybe, I said maybe Gorsuch was joined because he's sometimes part of that bloc, but it is kind of a joke that Brett Kavanaugh, if you want to talk about who's a centrist on the court, Brett Kavanaugh is the center of the court right now. That is, no wonder there's a crisis of confidence in the courts, and you'll see that in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary I'm going to show you in a minute. But there was this second joke that Dahlia Lithwick made a little bit later on about, this is talking about how Supreme Court justice appointments are now much more important to Democrats, but back in 2016, even though there was like an open seat and 2 people in their 80s on the court, the Democrats, well, they didn't care. But, you know, I mentioned at the beginning that Dahlia Lithwick is about my age, and so you would think I would get her references. She makes a reference to, like, I think it might be in sleep mode. She's talking about like they're in sleep mode, but she uses a phrase that I wouldn't use to mean in sleep mode. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that brief clip together over here.
Well, just remember, in that same election, we have 3 octogenarians on the court and an empty seat for months and months. And we have one side campaigning on the issue that we will pack the court. And we have Democrats who are saying, like, screen save, nothing to see here.
I don't think they'll do that again. Before we go,
Screen save. That didn't even make sense to me till I thought about it, and I thought maybe she's talking about screensaver. When you go into sleep mode or whatever, there's a screensaver, and so you're not even paying attention, or you're not online, or you're not like active. That's all I can think that means. But that was kind of a joke that Dahlia Lithwick made. I know, slim pickings on the political comedy this week, and I'm going to get to the main topic after I show because I'm going to show the news summaries longest to shortest, and the longest one was actually over 5 minutes from NBC News' Meet the Press. And I want you to watch the whole thing and tell me because there's a lot of good analysis in here about what's going on with the Supreme Court and some of the things that have made it lose the confidence of the American people, and it's an important issue, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be covered on Meet the Press, but is this 5-minute analysis that is, informative, is it worth not covering the debt ceiling deal on the Sunday after? It was Saturday night, it was announced, Sunday it was like in process. Is it worth like not really covering the news to do this like special edition of Meet the Press? Because you'll see Chuck Todd in his intro here. It's obviously pre-recorded before the debt ceiling deal was announced, which was like Saturday afternoon, I think, or at least Saturday afternoon my time, I'm pretty sure. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the Meet the Press news summary that wasn't really about the news, but a more like broad, newsworthy topic over here.
Good Sunday morning, and while official Washington is still consumed by the debt ceiling talks, we're going to take a step back this Sunday and look at a larger issue, the Supreme Court. It's never been more powerful in our lives or more broken when it comes to public trust. Just a quarter of Americans have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in this court, a 50-year low. In the eyes of the American public, the justices' robes, they're no longer black, they're red and blue. And the political destruction of the court lies at the feet of another institution, the United States Senate. It has broken the judiciary and the Supreme Court. The role of the Senate in confirming federal judges, including Supreme Court justices, is technically, of course, advice and consent. And between 1789 and 1965, more than half of the nominees that went to Senate confirmation votes, 65 of 110, were confirmed on voice votes, i.e. the ayes have it. Just 3 justices in that period were confirmed with a margin of fewer than 10 votes. But since 1965, of the 22 successful nominees of the court, 6 were confirmed with less than 60 votes. All 6 of them are currently sitting on this current court, a nod to polarization. Of the 6 Republican-appointed justices on the court, just one, John Roberts, a Bush appointee, was confirmed with more than 60 votes. All 6, by the way, were members of the Federalist Society, which is now the gatekeeper for Republican-appointed nominees. You cannot be nominated for any judgeship if you're not a member of this institution. The goal, to get justices on the court and judges on the bench who are as conservative as possible. They're not looking for umpires. The legitimacy of the Supreme Court depends on a public belief that justices, though, are impartial referees in the political battles that break out between the branches of government or ideologies, left and right. Just listen to what Chief Justice John Roberts promised during his confirmation hearing and what Clarence Thomas said the day after Bush v. Gore was decided.
It's my job to call balls and strikes and not to pitch or bat.
Whatever you do, don't try to apply the rules of the political world to this institution. They do not apply.
But those are sound bites from another era, aren't they? Now neither party wants a referee calling balls and strikes, or even to pretend that's the goal. Both parties want an activist judiciary in what has become a race to the bottom. Since the Bork nomination in the 80s, every move has been a tit for tat, and each party has rationalized its escalation in the judicial wars by claiming the other side did it first. Here's a stunning fact. The last time a Republican-controlled United States Senate confirmed a Democratic president's Supreme Court nominee, Grover Cleveland administration, nearly 130 years ago. In 2013, pushed by the obstruction of Obama's nominees to the federal courts in that moment, as well as the executive branch, Democratic Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid decided to go nuclear, in his words, ending the filibuster, the 60-vote requirement, for judicial nominees below the Supreme Court.
Aren't you worried Republicans will just get rid of the filibuster on the Supreme Court anyway?
Let them do it. Why in the world would we care? We were trying to protect everybody. I mean, do they want simple majority? Fine. I mean, all these threats about we're going to change the rules more. What is the choice? Continue like we are or have democracy?
Well, Democrats did learn to care. President Donald Trump worked with Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell to reshape the federal judiciary, appointing 54 federal appellate judges in 4 years, just one short of the 55 appointed in 8 years. In February of 2016, less than 2 hours after the death of Justice Antonin Scalia, 9 months before the election, 11 months before the end of Obama's term, McConnell made it clear that he would not even confirm a replacement before a new president had taken office. The Republican-controlled Senate went further and even refused to have a hearing on Merrick Garland, Obama's nominee for that seat.
One of my proudest moments is when I looked at Barack Obama in the eye and I said, Mr. President, you will not fill this Supreme Court vacancy.
And in 2017, when Democrats filibustered Trump nominee Neil Gorsuch for that Scalia seat, McConnell went further and he ended the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees as well. So changing the rules and allowing now one party to muscle through its nominees on all levels of the judiciary and able to reshape all the justices into partisan actors. And of course, paving the way for Trump to put 3 justices on the Supreme Court, the most by any one-term president since Herbert Hoover. Now unhappy with the ideological makeup of this court, some Democrats are arguing to change the rules again by expanding the number of justices on the court, or so-called court packing. The political destruction of the court has created opportunities for ethical failures as well. The justices have little accountability because their own partisans protect them, as in the case of Clarence Thomas. And as long as 50 votes is the threshold, more presidential candidates are comfortable dropping the pretense that justices should be impartial referees calling balls and strikes.
You replace a Clarence Thomas with somebody like a Roberts or somebody like that, then you're going to actually see the court move to the left, and you can't do that.
And joining me now is Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who chairs the Judiciary Committee.
And yeah, like I said, it was a good but seemingly pre-recorded discussion about an important issue. I have, some quibbles with the way that Chuck Todd framed the history of the downfall of the Supreme Court or whatever. He did talk somewhat about how the Republicans held up the nomination after Scalia died and then got rid of the filibuster to put Neil Gorsuch in. Didn't talk so much about Brett Kavanaugh. There's like more and more evidence that the allegations of sexual misconduct and lying in his confirmation hearings was covered up by a limited FBI investigation. There's apparently a new movie that was at some film festival I saw, and that's something I know a lot about that I made specific videos about, and I'm not going to go into. And then didn't really talk about how the rushing through of Amy Coney Barrett totally made McConnell and Republicans hypocritical on the holding up of the Merrick Garland nomination without even a hearing, and then rush through Amy Coney Barrett in the exact opposite fashion. That may also, and not enough about the overturning of Roe v. Wade is one of the reasons there's loss of confidence in the courts. Also, like saying it all started with the Bork nomination, which I don't think is true, that Ted Kennedy and the Democrats blocked the nomination of Robert Bork based on his history of being like someone who didn't believe that it was legal to have civil rights laws. And that's kind of the basis, really, of the big right-wing backlash against the Supreme Court. And I would go before Bork. I remember when I was a kid, there were these big billboards put up by the John Birch Society that said, "Impeach Earl Warren," because of, desegregation and no longer doing separate but equal, and, integrating the schools, and then various other liberal decisions of the Supreme Court. And the John Birch Society is definitely like the precursor of Alex Jones and QAnon. It's sort of like a straight line between all those people, I think. So that's an important fact that got left out of that whole history. But my main criticism is what I said before I showed the news summary, is that it's, didn't really cover the news this week. It's like the flagship weekly news program of NBC. And it was obviously pre-recorded, as you saw from what Chuck Todd said there. And anyway, speaking of biased news, the next news summary is Fox News Sunday, where actually this news summary was not that bad, because, I mean, it's kind of a weird subject to cover, the debt ceiling deal. They're kind of covering it as if Republicans are the winners and Biden is the loser. But I'm not sure that's true, and there's like more and more rumblings from the right, and they kind of cover that too, and I'll talk about all of that a little more. I mean, the one thing I would say is Fox News Sunday said that they actually reached agreement. This is before there was even a bill written, and I think that's kind of inaccurate. You'll see CNN calls it reaching an agreement in principle, and CBS News Face the Nation says a deal in principle. But Fox News Sunday just says reaching agreement on raising the debt ceiling or suspending the debt ceiling. That's this weird thing that they, on Fox News, they're maybe to look the House, maybe to make the House Republicans look good. They're claiming that suspending the debt ceiling isn't raising the debt ceiling, but it's still allowing there to be $4 trillion more in debt. And anyway, and I see Tom Trask gave me a super chat contribution. Thank you for that, Tom Trask. And I'll see what else is going on in the live comment section as we watch the Fox News Sunday so-called news summary together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington this Memorial Day weekend. We are waking up to the news this morning that President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy have reached a debt limit agreement. It took weeks of negotiations, and it comes down to the wire. Congressional leaders now must get the agreement through both chambers before June 5th. Some Republicans are already pushing back on certain details, and we've learned Democrats will hold a call later today to talk about what is actually in the deal. In a moment, my exclusive live interview with the Speaker of the House. I'll ask him what's in the deal and whether or not he can sway some very upset critics. And then we'll speak live with Democratic Congressman Jim Himes about the concessions the White House made. But first, let's turn to Chad Pergram, who is live on the Hill following every twist and turn. Hello, Chad.
Shannon, good morning. The deal does not hike the debt ceiling. It only suspends it through the presidential election. The bill caps most spending at a growth rate of only 1%, but Pentagon spending could increase. Now the selling begins.
Conversations I've had with members, they feel great about the deal. I mean, when you're talking about reducing spending, rolling back the regulatory state, clawing back COVID funds, and lifting Americans out of poverty, there is a lot to celebrate.
Kevin McCarthy conceded he did not expect to get all GOP members. Some conservatives are on fire. Ralph Norman tweeting that the deal is, quote, insanity. Bob Good saying that no one claiming to be a conservative could justify a yes vote. Democrats will balk at additional work mandates for healthy people to qualify for some federal benefits.
There are already work requirements in place. We're talking about expanding these work requirements. And, I would simply say, it's raised great concerns.
They hope to post the bill today. The House could vote Wednesday. The Senate maybe next weekend, just before the June 5th deadline. Shannon?
Chad Pergram on the Hill. Thank you very much, Chad. Joining us now, Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Mr. Speaker.
And I will have a clip of Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. And actually, there was this weird thing where he claimed that the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, the head Democrat in the House, said something to him about there's like nothing in this bill for Democrats, which he claimed was in the private conversations. And then I'm going to show you a clip right after that of Hakeem Jeffries saying, no, I don't know what he's talking about, which I don't know. There are various possible explanations for that. After I get to those clips, I'll ask you. It could be that Kevin McCarthy just made it up and he's lying, or that he misunderstood something Hakeem Jeffries actually did say, which is a possibility Hakeem Jeffries raises in his response, or they both made a deal. Because, if they're actually, you'll see when Kevin McCarthy gives his answer that he says that he's trying to build a relationship of trust with Hakeem Jeffries. And if you're trying to build a relationship of trust with someone, you probably don't want to give away things they say to you in private conversations unless you've agreed to say that thing in advance. And that's like maybe it's like a deal they made that he would say this and Hakeem Jeffries would deny it, or I don't know. It could be some weird way to sell the plan, because that's the thing. To get Republicans to vote on it, to vote for the deal, they have to convince them that Democrats are mad, and then Democrats have to be convinced that Republicans are mad. And it seems like the extremes in both parties are mad at some of the things in this deal. Basically, there's not much. I don't think the Republicans got much. They did get negotiation. Because you remember the original negotiating position of the Biden administration was clean debt ceiling, no conditions. And so Biden didn't get that. But Republicans' initial position was they wanted to roll back all the spending from the first 2 years of the Biden administration. And they didn't get that either. One thing that Chad Pergram said there, and I think it's in some of the other news summaries or discussions, is he said a 1% increase in non-defense spending. But one of the important things that's actually in the bill text, and you can read the whole bill at a link I put under sources in the video description, is it's inflation adjusted 1% increase. So it's a 1% increase after inflation. And if inflation's 9% or 6%, like it's been for, it's somewhere between 6 and 9% in the last year, that's a huge increase beyond just the 1%. So that's important to note, that I don't think you're going to see in any of these discussions, but something that's in the bill text. But I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the next shorter news summary from Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union. Maybe the best news summary on the news, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hi, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is waiting to exhale. President Biden and Speaker McCarthy last night announced that they have struck an agreement in principle to lift the nation's borrowing cap and avert a looming fiscal catastrophe, with the U.S. set to run out of money to pay its bills as early as Monday, June 5th. But a big question remains. Can they now get this deal passed in time? President Biden acknowledged last night that the agreement is, quote, a compromise, which means not everyone gets what they want, unquote. And already we know about deep concerns from progressives and from conservatives. McCarthy, on a call with Republicans last night, reportedly said the Democrats did not get a single thing they wanted in the deal. And McCarthy emphasized what the GOP got in exchange for raising the debt limit, capping non-defense domestic spending, canceling billions in IRS funding, and temporarily imposing work requirements on childless, able-bodied adults younger than 55 who receive food stamps. President Biden says the agreement protects Democratic priorities and legislative accomplishments. One could also note that the deal lifts the nation's debt limit for 2 years, avoiding a messy fight just ahead of the 2024 election. And in general, the cuts are not as deep as many House Republicans wanted and many House Democrats feared. Joining us now, a Republican leader who helped negotiate this deal, Congressman Dusty Johnson of South Dakota.
And I actually don't have a clip of Dusty Johnson. I have a clip of Pramila Jayapal answering an important question from Jake Tapper, like, why didn't Democrats take care of this when they controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency for 2 years? Like after the midterm elections, when in like the lame duck session, they could have taken care of the debt limit. Why didn't they do it? And I'll show you that answer in clip number 9. But that was clip number 5, the penultimate news summary. It was a pretty good news summary of where the politics is right now and a very brief summary of what's in the debt ceiling deal. And then the shortest of the news summaries is Margaret Brennan over on CBS News' Face the Nation. Also a pretty good news summary, I mean, compared to Fox News Sunday or NBC News Meet the Press. Actually, like I said, Fox News Sunday wasn't that bad this week. Chad Pergram did an okay job talking about the various conflicts on the debt ceiling deal. I don't know what is that whole thing about? They didn't raise the debt ceiling; they just suspended it so that they could increase the debt $4 trillion. What does that even mean? I don't know. That's my one big criticism of the Fox News Sunday news summary. You didn't hear that from CNN, and you don't hear it from Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation. In the final news summary, I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. With just 8 days to go before Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the U.S. will be forced to default on its spending obligations, there is a deal in principle to head off the crisis. The bill is still being written, and we are short on details at this point, but it will include a temporary cap on spending in areas other than defense, veterans, or entitlements. The plan would expand work requirements for able-bodied adults who receive some government benefits, including food stamps, but not for Medicaid recipients. And it calls for clawing back some unspent money from COVID relief funds. Leaders in both the House and Senate will now have to convince their members to vote for the bill, and we are seeing signs just in the last hour that it could be a tough challenge for both sides. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries joins us now from...
And I will have that Hakeem Jeffries clip, I promised, in the clip after next. But first, I want to show you Kevin McCarthy on Fox News Sunday. I wonder why that's the only program he went on, of course, because it's not really a journalistic news organization. It's a propaganda outlet of the Republican Party, which is what it was created to be by Roger Ailes, as you can find out by reading this book over here, The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman. I like to point that out most weeks if I can. And here you can see Shannon Bream really doing the work of some people in the right wing of the Republican Party, like making sure that Republicans got something in this deal. She talks about, did they really cut spending, which they didn't, and did they really stop the Biden's debt relief for people who took out student loans, which for some reason horrifies Republicans, which actually they didn't. That's one of the things people on the right wing are worrying about. And then she gets this quote from Kevin McCarthy that Hakeem Jeffries apparently told him there's nothing for Democrats in this bill, which why would he even say that? That doesn't even make sense. And you'll see Hakeem Jeffries deny it in the next clip. Shannon Bream, of course, doesn't really follow up after he makes this claim, which seems like a huge breach of trust. She even asks Kevin McCarthy, is he talking to Hakeem Jeffries? Do they have like a trusting relationship? And then doesn't follow up on the huge breach of trust by the end of the clip I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Majority.
So the Washington Post, writing about this yesterday, said this about what's ultimately in the deal. They said the White House agreed to an inflation-adjusted reduction in direct spending on discretionary programs, but one that will be mitigated by redirecting funds from other areas, such as the money clawed back from Internal Revenue Service expansion. Spending on these programs will rise by 1% in 2025 under the deal. There's a question about whether a lot of this is just a wash, if they're just moving money from one place to another.
Let's think about this. The president increases by $6 trillion. We have always said we're going to call back money, and then we're going to let Congress let government only grow at 1%. Why? Because it's been growing at 33% with the Democrats on discretionary spending. The president said we could only look at about 14% of the entire budget to get this done. We've been able to achieve that in this short time frame. But think about what else we repealed. This is the largest rescission in American history. You can add up all the rescissions from all the other Congress. This is greater. And what are we pulling back? CDC's Global Health Fund. So no longer are we sending $400 million of American taxpayers' money to China. We continue to pull that back. That is a victory for the American public, and I'll debate this bill with anybody, because at the end of the day, is it everything I wanted? No, but we don't control all of it. But it is the biggest rescission in history. It is the biggest cut in Congress has ever voted in that process, and you know what? We've been able to do it by making the economy even stronger, by putting work requirements in to put people back to work, and then streamline NEPA that hasn't been done in 40 years. We're going to cut the red tape. So if you want to build a road, if you want to put renewable energy, you want to have our energy become energy independent, you now have it streamlined and an opportunity with a time frame for review instead of 7 years to 1.
I want to ask you about student debt relief, because I'm hearing two different stories from what is in here and what's not. So you all have said that the pause on student debt repayments is going to lift. Is that my understanding? So that they'll come back. But the White House says this: the budget agreement keeps in place the president's plan to provide student debt relief for hardworking borrowers recovering from a once-in-a-generation pandemic. They make it sound as if their program's not going to change at all. Of course, we're waiting on the Supreme Court to decide on this.
Okay, but don't confuse the two. What the president did, he went unconstitutionally and said he was going to waive certain people part of their debt for student loan, but then he paused everybody's student loan. So everybody who borrowed a student loan within 60 days of the signing is going to have to pay that back.
So you're both getting something on that
The
front.
Supreme Court is taking up that case. But if the Supreme Court came back and said that was unconstitutional, the president could still say he's pausing, not waiving it. But now that this is in law, the Supreme Court decision will have to be upheld, that they would have to pay.
So the pause is gone.
The pause is gone
Okay.
within 60 days of this being signed.
Okay,
so
so
that is another victory, because that brings in $5 billion each month to the American public.
Have you talked to Minority Leader Jeffries? Because I know that you've tried to build a relationship there. It sounds like he's going to have to bring Democrat votes to the table, because you've got at least a couple dozen who say that they're not. What's your conversation like with him about how you guys get this across the finish line?
I know when I became Speaker, I wanted Congress to work differently. So I wanted to treat Hakeem the way I wanted to be treated. So I talk to Hakeem every single week. We could disagree about things, but I just want him to know what we're working on. Everything doesn't have to be political. But in every time that there is an agreement and a negotiation between the president and Congress, both parties, when they have an agreement, come together and vote for the bill, because both of them talk about it. I don't work with Hakeem to say, oh, I need these many votes. I think you're going to get a majority of Republicans voting for this bill. This is a good bill for the American public. The president agreed with this bill, so I think there's going to be a lot of Democrats that go vote for it too. Right now, the Democrats are very upset. The one thing Hakeem told me, there's nothing in the bill for them. There's not one thing in the bill for Democrats.
I don't know that that's going to persuade them to join him or you on these votes if they need to, but we'll talk to one of them next. Quickly, you've talked about getting back to regular order, the 12 appropriations bills that have to be passed.
And yeah, you'll hear about the 12 appropriations bills when I show the clip from Pramila Jayapal, the final newsmaker clip. But you heard there Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, after going into this whole thing about how he's trying to treat Hakeem Jeffries like I'd like to be treated and build this relationship of trust with him or whatever. And then he claims that Hakeem Jeffries told him something in private conversation, nothing in this bill for Democrats, that you're about to see Hakeem Jeffries totally deny, or maybe give an explanation for how he was misunderstood, or maybe it's evidence they have this plan to tell different stories about what they talked about. You can let me know after we watch the next clip. One thing I wanted to point out, two things I wanted to point out about that clip. First, Shannon Bream actually did say the words inflation adjusted in her questioning of Kevin McCarthy, because she quoted the Washington Post article, but never really followed up on how that was actually a huge increase in spending. If you adjust for inflation, that means you're giving 6%, 9%. Inflation is pretty high right now. So That wasn't really ever followed up on by Shannon Bream or addressed, although she did say the words inflation adjusted. And then also this thing about NEPA, reform in NEPA. I just wanted to, that's actually something I know a little bit about. Back when I was in law school, I actually wrote a chapter in this book here, NEPA Law and Litigation by Daniel Mandelkar. He was my professor. I was like a law clerk or whatever, or a researcher for my professor in this course I took. And so I actually learned about NEPA and CEQA, which is basically this law that says if you're going to do a big project that might affect the environment and the surroundings of the project, like a big subdivision, a road, or power plant, or even, as Kevin McCarthy pointed out in a different part of that interview, if you want to do like a green energy project, you have to do a study to figure out how it's going to impact the environment. And that's something that the Republicans hate, regulation to make sure that there aren't impacts on the environment, and that includes things like traffic and urban sprawl, and of course pollution, and species extinction, and all flora, fauna, all that kind of stuff. And so that is one of the things that was like tucked into this bill, along with a little goodie for Joe Manchin I'll talk about after I show the final clip. But the penultimate clip here is Hakeem Jeffries responding to what Kevin McCarthy said about there not being nothing in the bill for Democrats. And after we watch the two clips together, you can let me know in the comment section, did Kevin McCarthy lie, or was he mistaken and misunderstood something Hakeem Jeffries said? Or do they have like a deal that they like mutually agreed to say different things about what was said in their conversations? Or what's the explanation for this schism, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Okay, well, we'll only avoid a default if you can get the votes to get it through. Speaker McCarthy predicted this morning he can get a majority of Republicans. He says some Democrats he thinks will vote for it, but he also quoted something he says you told him. Listen.
I think there's going to be a lot of Democrats that go vote for it, too. Right now, the Democrats are very upset. The one thing Hakeem told me, there's nothing in the bill for them. There's not one thing in the bill for Democrats.
Did you say that? And how do you convince Democrats?
I have no idea what he's talking about, particularly because I have not been able to review the actual legislative text. All that we've reached is an agreement in principle. Now, what I've consistently said...
Did you even talk to him?
Both privately. I talked to him yesterday afternoon.
Okay.
What I haven't talked to him since that point in time. What I've consistently said, however, privately and publicly, was that the extreme MAGA Republican negotiating position, and that the extreme bill that they passed on April 26th, the Default on America Act, contained nothing that was consistent with democratic values or American values. And it was unreasonable to think that that negotiating position was going to be able to result in a resolution that would make sense for the American people, when he understood, and everyone understood, that a bipartisan resolution was the only way forward to avoid a catastrophic default.
Okay, and that's a bill that is going nowhere.
Yeah, and that was a bill that was going nowhere. I mean, that's the thing when you're looking at who won. The Republicans and the bill they originally passed in the House, they basically said they wanted to roll back all the spending of, as I was saying earlier, all the spending that the Biden administration and the Congress did when it was all controlled by Democrats. Well, so-called Democrats, at least, because it included Joe Manchin from West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona. And Kyrsten Sinema is not even claiming to be a Democrat anymore. And Joe Manchin is like the only Democrat who could be elected in West Virginia, which like voted, I think it was something like 70-something% for Trump in the last election. So it's not really a Democrat-friendly state, but Joe Manchin somehow keeps his job as a senator, or I don't know, he may even be running as a third-party candidate. And I did want to show this final clip that talks about why it was that Democrats didn't take care of the debt ceiling problem back when they controlled presidency, the House and the Senate, and it basically points to Joe Manchin. And then after I show that clip, as I promised, I'm going to explain how Joe Manchin, if nobody else, Joe Manchin was a big winner in this deal. I mean, I think the real big winners in this deal were wealthy people because, and big corporations who, anyone who wants to get some sort of construction project completed more quickly without any, or with much less analysis of how it's going to impact the environment, they're big winners. The people who, my big criticism of what the Republicans wanted is they wanted to deal with the debt problem by rolling back spending that the Democrats did in the last 2 years, but they didn't want to touch the Trump tax cuts from 2 years before that, which was at least as much responsible for the huge deficits as any of the spending. And Democrats did not get any tax increases, but as you saw one Republican say last week in my Monday media mix-up, they probably couldn't have gotten that through the Senate anyway. That's why they couldn't deal with the debt ceiling, because of Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, and that's basically what Pramila Jayapal says in answer to Jake Tapper pointing out that problem. And she talks a little bit about the appropriations process here too. But I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that final newsmaker clip together over here.
In this situation.
Sure, but you guys controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House until January. Why didn't you just take care of this in November or December?
Well, as you know, that's what I pushed for. That's what the Progressive Caucus put on our lame duck agenda that was public. Well, I think it's because we didn't have 50 votes in the Senate. Unfortunately, we are also governed by a couple of conservative Democrats and/or independents in the Senate who refuse to take the actions that we need to take, and I think that's why we ended up in the situation we're in. That's why we need a bigger majority in the Senate of people who are actually going to continue to do what the country needs and what our constitutional obligation is. Because, listen, the debt ceiling, and we've explained this ad nauseum, but I just think it's important to say it again. We go through an appropriations process. You know this very well, Jake. We go through an appropriations process. We argue. That is where the majority in the House and the Senate get to, figure out who's going to negotiate what, right?
Right.
And legislate, exactly. And at the end of that process, we come up with something, we pass it through a budget, we pass appropriations bills, and the debt ceiling is essentially about implementing what Congress has already passed.
Yeah, no, it's paying for money already spent.
That.
Yeah, 100%.
That's right. And I think at the end of the day, this is going to make it easier, hopefully, to take the debt ceiling off the table permanently. Brendan Boyle, our ranking member on budget, has a great bill. I'm a co-sponsor of that bill, to give the authority to the Treasury Secretary to be able to just raise the debt ceiling in accordance with whatever Congress has passed. That's really all we're saying is Congress passes this stuff. It should just be raised automatically. We should not allow people to continue to take us hostage.
Quick question before you go, Congresswoman.
So, as Pramila Jayapal was pointing out there, the reason this couldn't have been dealt with in the last Congress is because they only had 50 Democratic senators, and 2 of them were Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And if you remember, I followed the whole Build Back Better fiasco for weeks and weeks, and then that died, and then it came back as the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a much smaller package with some of the green energy spending that Republicans were not able to roll back with this debt ceiling deal. And the other thing, Pramila Jayapal was important pointing out that there's still a budget process. The debt ceiling shouldn't even be the way this is negotiated. And so there might be changes to both taxes and spending in the appropriations bills that are still to be negotiated. So, we don't even know if this debt ceiling agreement's going to pass, though I would bet that it probably is. It might lose both Republicans and Democrats on the edges, but I think it's not really that radical, and there are enough people in the middle to get it passed so they don't have to deal with the debt ceiling again until after the next presidential election. But I also wanted to point out a huge big winner here was Senator Joe Manchin, one of those conservative Democrats that Pramila Jayapal was talking about, who in the Build Back Better bill and then in the Inflation Reduction Act was trying to get this pipeline approved for his big fossil fuel donors. And he comes from a big fossil fuel family in West Virginia, and he's one of the biggest advocates for fossil fuel corporations in the Senate, and he wanted to get this pipeline approved. And I haven't seen much discussion of this on cable news, even though the bill text has come out. But if you check out like section 324 of the bill, expediting completion of the Mountain Valley Pipeline, this is like the thing that Joe Manchin was trying to get done, and get this permitting. It's a part of the whole NEPA thing, the getting rid of like environmental impact reports for a lot of projects, but it's like a subsection under the new permitting reform that's in this bill. And nobody's talking about how like one of the real big winners of this debt ceiling deal is none other than West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. This is back when there was a 50-50 Senate. This is an old screenshot I have of him, but I just wanted to use it to point out that one of the answers to the question I asked in the title of my video, who won the debt ceiling fight? Well, it's this guy and the petroleum industry and big corporations and rich people, the people who mostly win. What can I say? Those are the winners. Because they're the people who have the most influence on both of our big corporate political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. Big surprise. Not a surprise ending, I guess, but I appreciate all of you who joined me for the live show. I hope both my live show viewers and those who watch the recorded show appreciate the like 8 or 10 hours it took me over the last couple days to put together this broadcast and broadcast it out to you along with my commentary and criticism. I will be back next Monday and every Monday all the way through January 2025 to cover the next presidential election cycle for my Monday Media Mix-Ups. And I'll probably be back a little later in the day at my regular time because it's not a holiday next Monday. And so I'll probably see you all at like 4 or 5 p.m. Pacific time next Monday. Unless I have some reason to upload some other video during the week. But until then, or until next Monday, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.